call the hearing to order. The Joint Economic Committee is holding this hearing because entrepreneurship matters. John Arensmeyer is founder and CEO of Small Business Majority, an organization focused on empowering America's entrepreneurs to build and thrive in an inclusive economy. In the past few years, he has spearheaded the growth of Small Business Majority's entrepreneurship program, providing resources to our nation's 28 million small businesses. He was also the founder and CEO of ACI Interactive, an award-winning international e-commerce company. Welcome and look forward to your testimony.
Vice Chair Lee and members of the committee, thank you for inviting me to speak with you today about problems that can help promote entrepreneurship, policies that can help promote entrepreneurship. I've spent many years as a small business owner. I was the founder and CEO of ACI Interactive, an award-winning interactive communications company, which I ran for 13 years. Then 12 years ago, I founded Small Business Majority to empower America's entrepreneurs to build a thriving and inclusive economy. We have a network of more than 55,000 small business owners across the country with offices in Washington, D.C. and 8 states. We interact daily with small business owners and conduct scientific research on a wide variety of topics. In order to ensure our nation's job creators can thrive and help grow our economy, it's crucial that Congress focus on policy solutions that are targeted to help our nation's entrepreneurs succeed, most particularly the need for access to responsible credit and capital, affordable and quality health coverage, and tax reform that directly benefits Main Street small businesses. Regarding tax reform, we need a tax system that benefits small business owners who are focused on growing their enterprises, satisfying their customers, and making payroll. Right now, according to our polling, 90% of small business owners feel that our tax system primarily benefits wealthy corporate interests at their expense. We don't want special treatment, we just want a level playing field. That's why we're concerned by the current proposal for tax reform. While some are touting the plan as a boon for small businesses, the reality is that it will not actually benefit most Main Street businesses while adding at least $2.4 trillion to our budget deficit over the next 10 years. Specifically, some claim that the current proposal to cap the tax rate for pass-through entities at 25% would be a boon for America's entrepreneurs. In fact, this would impact only a handful of small firms. More than 87% of pass-through entities already pay a marginal tax of 25% or less. Moreover, if individual tax brackets of 12, 25, and 35% are passed, as is proposed, the pass-through entities that would benefit from the pass-through cap rate would include only the 1.8% earning $425,000 or more. And last but not least, a tax code with a large gap between top individual rates and top pass-through rates can potentially encourage wealthy individuals to game the system by simply declaring themselves pass-through entities. I think we've seen this in the experiment that Kansas ran. If Congress wants to offer a responsible tax cut for most Main Street small businesses and offset that cut with a reduction in existing loopholes, allowing all businesses to deduct a modest amount of their profits from the bottom up would have a much greater impact. As for corporate taxes, cutting the top rate would certainly help some of the minority of small businesses that are organized as C corporations, but doing so without getting rid of corporate tax loopholes would greatly increase the deficit. Economists from the Tax Policy Center estimate that reducing the corporate rate to less than 26% would be impossible to offset with just a reduction in loopholes, and a reduction as proposed to 20% would reduce federal tax revenue by $1.6 trillion over 10 years. We have a set of specific tax proposals that are included in my written testimony. A more critical issue for entrepreneurs is access to capital. Unfortunately, too many businesses, especially women and minority-owned firms and entrepreneurs in distressed and rural communities, are struggling to gain the capital they need to launch or grow their businesses. According to our scientific opinion polling, 90% of small business owners agree that access to capital is a problem. Statistics on lending to women and minority business owners are included in my written testimony, as are the specific reasons that small business borrowing has gotten so much more difficult since the recession. Finally, small business owners need reliable and affordable health care so that they can invest their time and resources into growing and expanding their businesses. Prior to the implementation of the ACA, entrepreneurs and their employees comprised a disproportionate share of the working uninsured. Post-ACA, the uninsured rate for small business owners and employees and self-employed individuals has fallen dramatically, and millions of them have gained coverage from the marketplaces and from Medicaid expansion. Finally, the ACA has greatly reduced so-called job lock, a phenomenon where people are tied to their jobs as opposed to striking out on their own simply due to their inability to get health coverage. We have a set of specific access to capital and healthcare proposals that are included in my written testimony. Thank you again for inviting me to appear today. I look forward to your questions.
Mr. Arensmeyer, you mentioned that there are a number of small business and Main Street focused tax reform proposals. I noticed there's a long list in your written testimony. Do you want to talk a little bit about what you think is most important from that list?
Sure, Senator, thank you. I think, as Congress considers, making changes to the tax code, you have to make some tough decisions. I mean, obviously, tax breaks for everybody, people would love them. But I think, our opinion is you need to focus on what is going to have the biggest impact at the most, reasonable cost. And for example, we've proposed, instead of cutting the top, the pass-through rates down to 25%, why not give small businesses the opportunity to deduct the first $25,000 of their income? That's going to impact every small business that actually pays taxes, which is about 75% of businesses in any given year. There's also the Investment Opportunity Act that the chairman mentioned. Definitely some of the proposals from the other witnesses about targeted benefits in the tax code for very specific types of investments, particularly in distressed communities. We definitely support that. Passing, changing the law that allowing self-employed individuals to deduct the FICA portion of their healthcare costs before they, right now they have to pay the tax on that when they earn it, and they don't get the benefit that a regular company does. So there are a whole host of expanding the small business tax credit under the ACA. So there's some very targeted things that can be done that are going to have a much broader impact on the majority of Main Street small businesses than what's been proposed right now.
So generally, I want to ask a question about whether or not we should pay for tax reform. Should it be revenue neutral? And I'll start with Mr. Arensmeyer, and we'll just go down the list.
We believe it should be revenue neutral. I mean, right now, there's, we've reduced our deficit in recent years, but I think to turn that around is going to have long-term disastrous effects on our economy. Ultimately, right now, we benefit from low interest rates, but ultimately, interest rates are going to go up if we continue this. And there's really no reason to do that. I mean, most decisions that businesses make, quite frankly, are actually not based on taxes. They're based on access to capital. They're based on whether they have adequate health care to go out and start businesses. They're based on the availability of qualified workers, including immigrants in their community, which have really driven a lot of the startup success stories you heard from the other witnesses are being driven by more expansive immigration laws. So there's a lot more going on than just taxes. And again, it comes down to a set of priorities. What is going to have the biggest impact, and how can this be done in a way that's not going to hurt the deficit?
How important is it to have lower rates for both C corporations and for those successful entrepreneurs who are pass-throughs, especially since pass-throughs, they saw a massive increase in their top tax rate from 35% to up to 44.6% recently?
Yes, just I want to remind the committee on the pass-through rates. When you're talking about 39.6% and adding on state tax, et cetera, on top of that, you're talking about a small sliver of small businesses. Only 1.7% of pass-through entities pay at the 39.6% rate. 87% pay 25% or less, 70% pay 15% or less. So there's not a really close connection between most the taxation faced by most Main Street small businesses and the individual rate structure at the upper levels.
And I'd like to ask Mr. Arensmeyer, I'd like to ask you about health insurance. I noticed a very interesting post on your small business majority website that was titled "Defeat of the Affordable Care Act Repeal Measure is a Big Victory for Small Businesses," noting that if the bill had passed, people would likely have lost their health care coverage thanks to the measure's gutting of Medicaid and the subsidies that were the primary driver of coverage expansion under the Affordable Care Act. And you noted and estimated it would cost our economy over 580,000 jobs. Could you expand on your concerns for us? This is an ongoing debate before Congress.
Sure, Congressman. The rate of the marketplaces and the expansion of Medicaid have made it possible for millions of not only small business owners and small business employees who were not receiving job-based healthcare to get coverage, and millions of self-employed entrepreneurs. In fact, last year on the California exchange alone, 25% of all people who signed up for Covered California were self-employed individuals. So for the first time, I talked about job lock in my testimony. For the first time, you have a situation where the ability to get health coverage is not driving decisions to start or grow small businesses. So we've seen a huge boon in entrepreneurial activity as a result of the Affordable Care Act, allowing people to simply get health care when they couldn't before.
Mr. Arensmeyer, Mr. Deary's testimony notes, he has the chart about new entrants. And it starts to collapse in 2005. And I'm not aware of any major change in tax policy around 2005 that have had such a crippling impact on new business formation. As you pointed out, very few startups have heavy tax burdens. Only a very small percent pay the top corporate rate. Mr. Hodge pointed out that 55% of pass-through income is at that high rate. But as the principal in the 12 different pass-throughs, let me tell you, that's almost all from large, mature, established pass-throughs, some that have been around for decades, not the startups, not the entrepreneurs that this hearing addresses. Wouldn't it make sense to conclude that the decline in new business formation is primarily not a tax story, but that other factors and policies are more critical? For example, college debt, barriers to entry in so many different businesses, access to capital, which we've talked about. Mr. Arensmeyer.
Yes, Congressman. I would absolutely agree. There are myriad reasons why the opportunity for to start up goes up or goes down. I should point out that our period of greatest economic growth recently, and one where we actually temporarily closed the budget deficit, was in the 90s when we had passed you all had passed a tax cut in a tax increase in 1993, and there really wasn't any relationship between that and the fact that the economy was really booming. You're absolutely correct. It's access to capital, access to health care, access to a qualified workforce, which includes immigrants who are, by the way, twice as likely to start new businesses as a national average. It's a whole host of factors that you cited. And I don't want to imply that taxes aren't irrelevant, but all the polling that we have done shows that the concern about a robust economy, access to health care, are ranked far higher than taxes as a major reason for making business decisions.
Mr. Arensmeyer, to continue, Ben Castleman wrote recently in the New York Times, quote, "The slump in entrepreneurship has coincided with a period of increased concentration in nearly every major industry. I was raised as an automobile dealer. There were 50,000 car dealers the year I was born. We're down to about 17,000 right now. Something like AutoNation, I think, sells 16 or 17%, one company of the new cars sold in America. What's the impact of this concentration in industry after industry on the ability to start a new company?"
I think it's made it more challenging. I think, again, we need there's no question that some industries, it's okay to grow, and some industries, a product is delivered much better by a larger entity, but we need a balance between excessive concentration and to make sure that we're not stifling the opportunity for small businesses to begin and grow.
One of the things I see is I have 3 millennial children who are all entrepreneurial, and when I visit the startups, the equivalent of Ohio Venture in Virginia, they're wonderful, they're great energy, but they're all looking for something brand new. They're not starting firms that have been around for a long time. And so it really creates maximum creativity to try to think of some place that's never existed before and starting there. Mr. Arensmeyer, you also talked about the limited benefit of full expensing. I think for Mr. Hodge, I unfortunately look at these things through my own family business experience and think, boy, if we could full expense, I have all these buildings, boom, wonderful for 2017 taxes. But then after that, I'm paying taxes on my interest expense for years and years to come. Have you looked hard at the trade-off between taking away interest deductibility versus the full expensing?
Well, interest deductibility is something that's taken, across the board on a percentage basis by large and small business entities. So we're not necessarily in favor of reducing that because, in fact, it's harder for smaller businesses to get access to equity capital, and they're often, debt is a higher percentage of what's fueling them. So their ability to deduct interest on a percentage basis is actually often greater than a larger company. As far as full expensing is concerned, obviously right now under Section 179, small businesses can take essentially do full expensing up to $500,000 a year. We don't see a huge benefit to smaller entities to change the law to allow for full expensing for much larger entities.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for your testimony. Right now, the vast majority of pass-through entities, 86% to be exact, are taxed below 25%. So ostensibly, the tax break is for the remaining 14% of pass-through entities, most of which are individuals in the top 1% of economic distribution. Mr. Arensmeyer, as you are aware, revenue neutrality is a key component of tax reform, but to do so, major changes are needed to offset the cost of lowering tax rates. One such provision being considered is eliminating interest deductibility. So does it make sense to eliminate this provision to help pay for reform, or would you advocate keeping it?
As I said earlier, Congresswoman, small businesses use the interest deductibility on a percentage basis at least as much as larger businesses, if not more. I think there are other, if you're looking for other offsets in the tax code, for example, the offshore deferral, which costs $1 trillion over 10 years, not only does that not benefit any small businesses, it actually doesn't benefit most large businesses. About 50 to 60 multinational corporations take most of that benefit. So there are other provisions in the tax code you can look to other than interest deductibility to look for offsets. And we would agree that perhaps some reduction in the corporate rate makes sense. We would agree that some of what's been proposed by us and others here on the panel in terms of targeted incentives for venture capital and other types of investing. So you will need to be looking for offsets, but I'm not sure the interest deductibility is the place to look.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to yield back.